All right, so it is exactly 10:30 now, so I think we are going to get started here with our safety connection. Um, Maybe just first, either a hands up or a thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me and see PowerPoint slides on your screen. All right, lots of hands and thumbs. Thank you so much for that, guys. I appreciate it. Don't want to keep talking if nobody else is unable to hear me. So that's amazing. All right, so welcome to today's Safety Connection. We are here for the next hour and a half or so, talking about the Working for Workers Acts. So as we are probably all aware, for the last several years now, the Ontario government has been putting out these Working for Workers Acts, which have really been um, changes to legislation that have been implemented to help support Ontario workers in Ontario workplaces. And the Working for Workers Acts have been changing all kinds of different pieces of legislation. So not only have we been seeing changes in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, we've been seeing changes to legislation when it comes to employment standards, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to skilled trades, and all kinds of other pieces of legislation as well. In this safety connection specifically, we will be focusing mainly on the changes that have been happening in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. But I will touch on some other changes that have had great impact when it comes to, safety and protection of workers, as well as we go through the presentation. But first, maybe we'll start off doing a little bit of housekeeping and making sure that we're all feeling comfortable with the platform. Okay, so the first slide that I have popped up here is just a QR code where the ministry is looking to collect some demographic information. So it is just a very, very short survey. You can basically scan this QR code at any time. And again, the ministry is just trying to collect some demographic information to find out a little bit more about the types of industries, the types of people that are coming to these sessions to get some information for them to use to basically further enhance any kind of offerings they have. You can see the information in the chat as well. You will be asked to put in that function number that's there also. And again, you can do the survey at any time, either throughout the presentation or at the end of the presentation as well. Interestingly enough, this collection of information is actually one of the changes that happened with the Working for Workers Acts. We'll actually focus on this a little bit later on. Okay, so a couple more, again, housekeeping things just about the presentation itself. So we do recommend that you are using your computer audio. It does help with the sound a little bit. However, phone audio is available if you aren't able to use your computer audio. Your microphone and your cameras will remain off or muted, but the chat box is available for the entire session, and we will be using our chat box to communicate, to share, answer questions, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we won't have any availability to use your microphone or your camera, but your chat box will be available at all times. All right. Other things, just to kind of to be aware of when it comes to how these presentations work. You've already used a lot of the reactions as well, but there may be times throughout the presentation that I ask you to either put your thumbs up or your hands up or whatnot. You can use that by using that reaction box, kind of right beside the people icon on the top. It'll say people, raise hand, and then react. So again, feel free to use those at any times. There is no polls in this session. We are going to just use some sort of open chat dialogue and open chat questions. So no need to focus on any of those polls. Again, the chat box is available for use. You should see it either at the side or maybe the bottom of your screen, depending on your setup. I will be able to see the chat. I will try to monitor the chat as the presentation goes on. Some people in the background are also helping support monitor that chat in case I happen to miss any questions or comments. All right. So there is an ability to turn live captions on for this session as well. So if you go to the three dots kind of on the top, it says more underneath the dots. You can select those. You can select language and speech, and then you can turn on you can turn on live captions. You also have the ability to view this entire presentation in full screen view. So again, if you click on that view and then click full screen, you can see this in full screen. Only concern with full screen is that you don't get the view of the chat. So if you are interested in participating in the chat and reading the chat questions as they come up, that full screen option may not be the best one for this presentation, but it does let the slides look a little bit larger if that's what you're interested in. Okay, so goals of a safety connection. So the goal is certainly to learn hopefully a little bit from me, but also a lot from each other as well. So this is your opportunity to share what you have been doing at your own workplaces to maybe help implement the Working for Workers Acts, ask questions, get feedback from other peers in different or similar industries, and then again, hopefully learn a little bit from me as we're talking as well. You don't get as many opportunities to connect anymore. So hopefully this turns into a good opportunity to virtually connect with, again, people from maybe like industry or different industries than yourselves. So we can exchange and share those best practices, ideas, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right. So before we get into the agenda and sort of the rest of the slides, the other quick comments that I will make here, this presentation is being recorded, and the recording of the presentation will be available at some point after the presentation is done. I don't know exactly the timing on that, but just do know that that presentation will be available. You will also get an email at the end of the presentation providing some resources that are helping to support the Working for Workers Acts. You'll also get my contact information if any additional questions about anything come up. As we're going through, you can always reach out and contact me directly after the presentation as well. Basically, as far as our agenda goes, not a lot of excitement there on that slide. What we are going to do is actually go through the Working for Workers Acts that have been implemented so far. So hopefully most of us are aware that there are 6 of them so far that have been implemented. And then we'll go through the proposed changes that will be implemented, potentially implemented when we see Working for Workers Act 7 roll out. As mentioned, the focus of this presentation is going to be on the health and safety side. That is where we'll spend most of our time talking about the changes that have happened to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. I will mention some other changes as they're relevant to some of those other pieces of legislation as we go through. All right. So maybe a couple quick primer questions to get us chatting with each other. I have been looking at the chat to see where we're all coming from, and it looks like we are coming from basically all of Ontario. I saw as south as Windsor up into sort of southern and southwestern Ontario, all the way up into North Bay and Thunder Bay, which is amazing. Oh, there's someone from Kitchener. That's pretty close to me. I'm in the Cambridge area, so that's where I'm housed, is in that KW region over here. So let's again think about some of these primer questions, and then we'll get into some of the details about these different acts that have been implemented. So a couple questions that I've got on the screen here, and again, feel free to use the chat for any of these questions that are up here. Why do you think the Working for Workers Acts were initiated here in Ontario? Hi, good to see you there, Eric. And what are some of the key regulatory changes that you're aware of, or that maybe have given you the most focus or the most interest when it came to the Working for Workers Acts? I'm just going to read some of these as they come through. So we've got Brenda, improving worker conditions for workers. Absolutely. Improve working conditions. Yeah, for sure. Okay. That is one of the changes we're going to be talking about, Shelley. I'm assuming that one's talking about some of those changes that are of interest. ESA changes. Yeah, there's been a lot of them for sure, Brenda. Worker wellness. That's a projected one, the AED one. Yeah, not come through yet, Sandra, but that one's projected for sure. Yeah, and these are great answers for sure. And that honestly is the answer, right? The Working for Workers Acts came into play to really help support workers in all aspects of their workplaces, right? So supporting them when it came to safety, supporting them when it came to equity and fairness, supporting them when it came to support as far as like leaves and time off went, supporting equitable hiring practices. Again, it was really there for the support of all of the different aspects of a workplace and a worker's overall sort of equity when it came to their jobs and their positions. So as mentioned, the Working for Workers Act changed or revised lots of pieces of legislation. Not only was it just the Occupational Health and Safety Act, but it was employment standards, it was skilled trades, it was integrations, training, skills development, all of those different pieces of legislation that were impacted. All right. So I do apologize that these slides have a lot of words on them. I promise I will paraphrase them as we go through, but wanted to give as much detail as possible when it came to the changes that did actually happen. Okay. So the first Working for Workers Act we saw was Working for Workers Act 1. It did happen in 2021. Just a little bit about legislation that we're probably mostly aware of. It is a bill when it's proposed, and then when it turns into legislation, it's no longer a bill. It just turns into the changes in legislation. But when Working for Workers Act 1 was proposed, it was Bill 27. So biggest changes, again, when we talk about the Occupational Health and Safety Act that we saw here, the first one was really around access to washroom facilities. So not yet are we talking about the changes to cleaning the washrooms. Right now, we're really focused on the washroom facility access. So the bill amended the act to add a duty under the owner definition. So the owner, or sorry, the owner responsibilities, I apologize. So one of the now responsibilities or the duties of the owner is to allow washroom access to outside workers, basically. So access to a washroom is provided on request to a worker who is present at the workplace to deliver anything to the workplace or to collect anything from the workplace or to deliver elsewhere. So we think about that really in the sense of our transportation drivers or our transport workers, anybody that's coming to the workplace to pick up goods, coming to the workplace to drop off goods. We now have to allow them access to the washroom or access to our washroom facilities in order for them to be able to use those facilities. There was some exemptions with this one, so it's not just full or free access to those washroom facilities. Again, those exemptions are listed there. So you are not required to allow access to your washrooms if providing it would not be reasonable or practical for reasons relating to health and safety or the health and safety of the workplace, including your workers or themselves. Or again, if it's reasonable or unpractical in accordance to the circumstances. So again, we made this change to make sure that our transportation drivers had ability to access our washroom facilities, but not at the sort of displacement of their safety, right? So if providing access to those washroom facilities is going to put them in harm's way or impact their overall health and safety, then obviously those would be those exemptions. So can anybody think of a reason why one of those exemptions might come into play? What would be a reason why offering access to your washroom facility may put the safety of one of those workers in jeopardy? What would be a time that you can think an exemption could come into play here? Yeah, so that's a great answer. I'm reading some of those answers on the side here. So hazardous work environment requiring training. Yep. Maybe lack of PPE. Sure, that could be a reason. forklift traffic, unknown area, yeah, and potentially if there wasn't a way to get them, to those washroom facilities on a path that would protect them, working alone, that could be an option for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's not just to say like it's free reign, everybody can come in to use the washroom facilities. We do again have that requirement now to allow them to, but again, not at the expense of their health and safety. So one other thing that I will add here, you can kind of see it just on the bottom of the slide there, but the Working for Workers Act 1, this was the big safety change that happened, was the access to washrooms. Another highlight that I will put here too is this is also when our right to disconnect came into play as well. So most of us are aware that we now have a requirement or an obligation to have a right to disconnect program or policy, meaning that employees have the right to disconnect from work when their workday is over. So there's no longer that, and hopefully there never was, but that requirement to be checking emails at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. Basically, when our days are done, we have a right to disconnect from our work days. This was a change that did happen under the Working for Workers Act 1, not directly related to health and safety as far as the act goes, but certainly related to the psychological safety of our employees, making sure that our workers, again, have that right to disconnect from work, making sure that our employees can support and recognize that work-life balance. Okay, so the next one that we saw was Working for Workers Act 2. Working for Workers Act 2 was implemented in 2022. At that time, it was termed Bill 88. And we saw quite a few changes happen to legislation in Ontario under the Occupational Health and Safety Act specifically. So this Working for Workers Act 2 is actually when we were introduced to the naloxone kit expectation or the naloxone regulations. So as again, hopefully most of us are aware, but we'll go through it now. The naloxone expectation changed sort of two pieces of of legislation. So within the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it commented or it gave expectation to the employer about determining if a naloxone kit would be a requirement. So under the employer expectations, there was expectation for the employer to determine if a risk of opioid concern could be at the workplace, and if there was a risk of opioid concern at the workplace, then a naloxone kit would need to be implemented, and that naloxone kit would need to be implemented based on the naloxone regulations. So in this case, again, that naloxone kit requirement changed the act under employer responsibilities, and then potentially based on those employer responsibilities, implemented a regulation to allow us to follow the naloxone regulation if the company or the employer chose to follow it based on the criteria outlined within the act. So again, if the employer determined that there was a risk of an opioid concern at the workplace, then a naloxone kit needed to be provided. If that kit was provided, the kit needed to be provided based on the requirements outlined in the regulation. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat too. So what if there is not a concern about the employee, but about the customers coming in? That's a really great question. The actual legislation is not talking or not concerns. That's a weird way to say that. But that's not the focus of the regulation. The focus of the regulation and of the actual change to the act was if the risk of opioid concern, opioid overdose was to the workers at the workplace. So it is not commenting or mentioning the potential visitors, customers, etc. that could come into your workplace. The act itself is focusing on risk of opioid concern to the worker. That's not to say that a company couldn't choose to have a naloxone kit on their own and sort of opt into it just because it's a good practice to maybe help support companies and help support customers and whatnot. But there was absolutely only the focus on the worker. Okay. Perfect. I will say that if a company does choose to have an naloxone kit, just because it's a best practice, not necessarily because they believe they meet the requirements set out in the legislation, you still need to follow the rest of the expectations written in the regulation. So even if you're using, again, that naloxone kit as like a good idea or a good practice, then that regulation, it still has to comply with those regulation expectations. Okay. I'm just reading another quick, I might have missed it. The right to disconnect is in, yeah, it did get released under Working for Workers Act 1. So that is where it happened. Yeah, so that's a link there, which is really great. Thank you for ever put that in there. Again, it didn't necessarily change the Occupational Health and Safety Act, but it did go into that employment standards and other elements in that sense. All right. Other thing that changed when it came to Working for Workers Act 2. So we did see actually a fine increase. So actually, as we go through all of the different Working for Workers Acts, you will see that fines or any kind of financial penalties when it came to health and safety have continued to increase fairly substantially. So this was the first one that we saw. This was actually an individual fine increase. So if an individual was charged or fined against the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the fine increase actually went from $100,000 to a $500,000 fine. So now again, this is not corporations, this is for the individual. The maximum $500,000 fine is what potentially could be given if, again, an individual is fined or charged under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Another thing that changed just when it came to the fines or the sort of prosecution and penalties expectation is the amount of time basically that the Ministry of Labor or the MLI, apologize, TSC, has to actually put in a prosecution or put in a fine or a charge of some kind. So this was actually increased from a 1 year period to a 2 year period. So you can kind of see it there. So no prosecution under the Act or the regulation shall be instituted more than 2 years after either the occurrence of the last basically issue or the day in which the ministry became aware of the last issue. So it went from a 1 year. So at one point prior to this Working for Workers Act coming into play, the ministry had 1 year after either the occurrence or awareness of the occurrence of the incident, and now the ministry has 2. So they've given themselves a little bit longer to potentially initiate prosecutions, initiate any kind of penalties, prosecutions, etc. A little bit longer than they previously had. So knowing that they now have 2 years, or the ministry now has 2 years to potentially initiate some kind of prosecution, does that impact or change anything that you guys may do at your workplace? What do you think about that potential change to your workplace that could happen because of this increase in time? Any thoughts on that one, or what might potentially change at your workplace because of this? Waiting to see if anything happens in the chat. If anything, I would think maybe your record retention. So I know at lots of companies, there's been some record retention that says that they'll keep records for no more than a year or no more than 12 months. Or I see lots of companies that'll say a year plus current. So 1 year plus the current year that you're in. Knowing that, again, the ministry now has a little bit more time for prosecutions, it may change how much time you choose to keep your records. Not having 2 years could be a good idea, or having at least 2 years could now be a good idea, because that could be how much records they'd be looking for if anything was to ever occur or happen. All right. So I am just going to put this up here. This didn't necessarily change because of the Working for Workers Act too, but I am going to highlight it because it didn't get a lot of attention before, and I just want to kind of outline that these aggravating factors are now outlined in the Occupational Health and Safety Act as well. So aggravating factors, again, not something that was talked about in a lot of detail before, but these are actually aggravating factors that the ministry can look at to basically help determine the type of prosecution and the type of charge that might be given. So again, it is there to really help support and determine the penalty that could be given. Really is those aggravating factors that helps the ministry determine how much the company sort of is involved with, or how much the company has from a blame perspective on a kind of incident that has potentially occurred. So we'll kind of just quickly read them over together. So there's 10 aggravating factors that have been outlined within the Act. So the offense resulted in the death, serious injury, illness of one or more workers. The defendant committed the offense recklessly. The defendant disregarded an order of an inspector. So if a critical injury or maybe fatality has happened after an order has been given from the ministry and that order was never paid attention to, that could be considered an aggravated factor. Defendant was previously convicted of an offense under this or another act. Defendant has a record of prior noncompliance with the act or regulations. Defendant lacks remorse. There is an element of moral blameworthiness in the defendant's conduct. In committing the offense, the defendant was motivated by the desire to increase revenue. After the commission of the offense, the defendant attempted to conceal or failed to cooperate, or any other circumstance that is prescribed in the aggravating factors. So again, this is something that became a little bit more focused on under the Working for Workers Act too. Not a lot of people that I've talked to have seen these aggravating factors before. So I did just want to highlight that they are outlined within the Act. These could be, again, things that the ministry is considering when they go to make a potential penalty under the Act if there has been an incident that has occurred. Maybe just give me a hands up. Has anybody actually ever noticed or seen these aggravating factors before? Is this something that anyone's ever read within the Act or paid attention to? A couple hands, a couple thumbs, maybe not as many as I was expecting. So if you haven't, again, taken a look at them before, they are, again, right within the Act. Not a bad thing to kind of pay attention to. Again, these can certainly impact the amount of penalty that the ministry may be imposing based on the type of incident that has potentially occurred. All right. So next, kind of quick question for us to hopefully learn a little bit from each other. How many workplaces that are on this call did choose to bring in a naloxone kit based on the requirements set out in the Act, or because it's a good practice? How many of us are actually using that naloxone kit in the workplace now? All right, so that's a lot, which is great. It's great to see that a lot of workplaces are doing it. It's equally okay if your workplace is not doing it. So again, I do want to make sure that that feels true, that it is okay either way. It is okay if you are choosing to bring in the naloxone kit based on the expectation. It is okay if you're not choosing to bring in the naloxone kit based on the expectation that's outlined within the Act. What you do need to make sure of, though, and I'm just going to highlight it here, is that you have documents to support your decision. So if you are choosing to not, based on it doesn't apply to you, you do not believe there's an opioid concern at your workplace, that's an okay choice, right? That is well within the expectations of the Act, but be able to prove that you talked about it, right? So you be able to show meeting minutes where you had that conversation with your senior leadership team, be able to show, I don't know, an email train or something that documents to say we were aware that there is a new expectation under the Act for the employer. We did talk about it. We did determine that we are not required to have an naloxone kit. We are not required to follow the regulation at this time. So that is, again, just something I have noticed that workplaces that have chosen to not use one or not have one provided. It's, again, completely at your decision based on the expectations outlined in the act. But if that's the decision you've made, you do want to be able to prove that that conversation happened and that you've got some documented evidence that says that that's the reason that you've chosen to not have one at your workplace. Um, sorry, I'm just reading. Sorry, I think it's Henry. Apologize, his question. So it can be discussed at your committee for sure, Henry. Just remember that it's not a committee's decision, it is the employer responsibility. So as much as it's okay to talk about it at your committee, there needs to be evidence that says that the employer was aware of and part of that decision, right? So again, it's not wrong to talk about it at the committee, but it's also not the committee's decision to make. It does have to be at that senior leadership level because of where it lands in the act. It is an employer responsibility, so it does have to be like an employer that's making that final decision. Sorry, just reading the next question from Allison there. So the act does not outline how often this needs to be discussed. There would be expectation that if changes to circumstance happened or there was a change in circumstance, that it would be rediscussed. So certainly if you had new knowledge of a potential concern, or again, if something changed the circumstance that could definitely impact that, you would want to rediscuss it. It is likely a best practice to review it on a quasi-regular basis. Maybe you choose to review it kind of once a year with your senior leadership team, and have that documented certainly again as that best practice. All right. Any other questions about this one before we move on? Feeling okay? All right. All right. Working for Workers Act 3. So we actually didn't see a lot of changes to health and safety legislation in Working for Workers Act 3. This one was what we would call a little bit of a lighter one when it came to the safety side. The biggest change that we saw with Working for Workers Act 3 was, again, another fine increase. So I mentioned in Working for Workers Act 2, we had a pretty significant fine update when it came to the individual. So in 2, we went from an individual fine of $100,000 to a $500,000 increase. In Working for Workers Act 3, it was the increase on the corporation. So the maximum corporate fine or fine from a corporation standpoint under the act went from $1.5 million to $2 million. So now if a corporation was to be fined under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it could be a $2 million fine per offense. Okay. Do remember here in Ontario, there's also a 25% victim fine surcharge posted or put on every single offense that happens. So it's really a maximum of $2 million per offense plus a 25% victim fine surcharge on top of that. So that does make Ontario the highest in Canada when it comes to the maximum fines. $2 million is the highest we have in Canada under all of the different provinces. Okay. So definitely increasing that financial hit is hopefully making companies and corporations really put that big focus on safety, really, for hopefully all kinds of other reasons, not just financial, but continuing to increase that financial penalty is hopefully also in continuing to increase that focus we have on safety as well. See a couple of hands up. I'm not sure if that was just from before, if there was a question. So again, if there is a question, do feel free to put it in the chat and we can take some time to answer it as well. All right, so moving on into Working for Workers Act 4. So in Working for Workers Act 4, there was actually no change to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, but there were a couple of changes that I will focus on when it comes to other pieces of legislation. So the biggest one that I'm going to focus on here is a little bit around some of the changes that happened to the hiring practice, or the changes that have happened to some of that interviewing hiring expectations. So actually, not even quite yet. So starting in January 2026, there is an expectation for mandatory pay transparency. So starting again, January 2026, for companies of 25 or more employees, they have to actually post the pay transparency on any of their postings. And they also have to be able, or also, sorry, have to post if AI was used for any of those job postings as well. So there is, again, that pay transparency. And we also have to post if AI was, again, used in the job posting. Okay. Yeah, so I'm reading, just sorry, another question there, Spencer. So if you're not using AI in your job postings, then you don't have to say anything about it. It is only if you are using AI to either, review resumes, go through applications, whatever that looks like, then that does have to be transparent. People do have to be aware that you are using AI to do any of those kind of expectations. Again, if you're not using it, if you've got an HR person or a manager or somebody looking through those paper copies on their own, then there's no requirement to disclose anything. Great question. Another thing that did happen here too, just when it came to, again, postings, is we did put, or the Ontario government did put a ban on requiring Canadian work experience. So there is no longer an ability or requirement to have Canadian work experience. If an applicant or an individual has work experience from somewhere outside of Canada, that absolutely could connect to or be equivalent to, then that's equally acceptable. Okay. Yes, you can say silent on AI if you are not using it. You only have to say that you are if you are. So you do not have to comment on AI if you are not using it in your hiring or application process. All right. What is meant by that pay transparency? So again, that mandatory pay transparency. So for companies of greater than 25 employees, a little bit of an expectation to put sort of like a pay band within the posting. So having some kind of pay range or some kind of pay level within the posting, so people have some awareness of pay expectations if they're actually applying to the job. Yeah, but again, only for companies of greater than 25. I can get back to you in a little bit more details. I don't think you need to say the exact number. If anybody has different information, I would love to hear it. I believe it's a little bit more of like a pay band or a pay scale. But again, some information about pay range does have to be available on those postings. Right. We're pausing to see if any more questions pop up here in the chat for us. Okay. The other one that I did post here on the Working for Workers Act 4, just because I think it's kind of important, is actually a change that happened to the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. So WSIB follows the WSIA, or the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. And that was a really great improvement for our firefighters. So there was an improvement to cancer coverage for firefighters and fire investigators by lowering the duration of employment needed to receive some of those compensations. So again, really, really good from a WSIB perspective for our firefighters. Obviously, they're doing great work, and obviously they have a lot of illnesses that potentially come from that work. So getting more support for them to get paid and some back pay is a really important change that happened in that industry. Any more questions, comments, concerns, chats about this one? Again, not a lot of safety changes here, but some good changes when it came to, again, our hiring processes and whatnot. Don't see anything else popping up, so we can move on. All right, Working for Workers Act 5 was our next one. So Bill 190, also kind of known as, came into play in 2024, and a lot happened. So this was a really big one for us, specifically when it came to health and safety. Um, there was a lot of changes to workplace definitions. There was a lot of changes to expectations under legislation. So lots of things for us to kind of go over here when it comes to the Occupational Health and Safety Act specifically. Okay, so the first thing, the definition of the industrial establishment actually changed. So definition to industrial establishment in subsection 1, bracket 1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act was amended by adding other than an office located in a private residence after office. So kind of re-highlighting that the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations have very limited scope when it comes to people working in their own private residence. So a Administrative Labor Inspector, an LLI TSD inspector can't come to your own home, to your own, office in your own home to do an inspection, as an example. There are some limitations, certainly to how the act and regulations can be implemented at your own home office in your own residence. So that was added to the kind of, again, exemption under the industrial establishments. The industrial regulations really cannot be enforced within your own home at your own home office. Okay. The next definition that did change, I think somebody mentioned this early, in sort of our earlier chats when we were talking. No, Ministry Labor Inspector cannot come into your home. Absolutely not, Julie. So an MLI TSD inspector cannot do an inspection of your own home office if it is in your private residence, right? So I'm sitting in my own home right now. We work from home when we're not on site. A Ministry Labor Inspector cannot come to my door, knock on the door, and do an inspection of my home office. Okay. That's a great question, Marag. So again, I guess the hotel is not considered, I guess, your private residence, but it would be similar. Like if you were working in your hotel room, like you personally were working in your hotel room, then they would not be able to do an inspection of like your hotel room, but an inspector could certainly do an inspection of the hotel, right? So they could do an inspection of a conference center for sure. They could do an inspection of, the hotel as far as to protect like the workers of the hotel. But if you're, at a conference in a different city and you're doing work at night in that hotel room, then that would not be somewhere that the ministry could do an inspection of. Okay. Rebecca, what if there's a critical injury of your home, or sorry, at your home? So certainly the WSIB applies in the sense that like you would still get WSIB coverage. You would still have to report that happening to the ministry, but very unlikely that the ministry would be able to do an inspection of your home to investigate it. So again, like if you fell down your own stairs and there was a critical injury, the ministry is not going to be coming to a private residence to do an inspection of your stairwell. Again, your home office is sort of not privy to the ministry inspections. Okay. Doesn't mean, again, it wouldn't be reported. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't still be WSIB or an investigation, but the ministry themselves would not be coming into your residence to do those investigations. Yeah, you would absolutely still report it to them for sure. It still happened at work while you were working. So all those reports would still be applicable with some detail, right? You'd still be saying to them that it happened at a home office with the details around it. But yes, it would still be considered reportable for sure. But the ministry is likely not coming to do that investigation of your private residence. Sorry, just continuing to read some of these chat questions. But if the employee is still responsible for health and safety of remote workers, yeah, so the employee absolutely still has responsibility of the health and safety of remote workers for sure, without question. So there is still, again, expectations to, make sure that they, have, good ergonomic setups. So that's certainly like an expectation. There's still expectation to ensure that they're protected from like violence and harassment concerns. So and we'll talk about that actually in the next definition that's happened. There's still expectation to ensure that they get appropriate breaks and those right to disconnects and things like that. Absolutely. But can kind of think about it like your company can't ensure that your front stairs are iced properly or salted properly, right? So it's again a little bit more of that like limited scope in the sense that we don't expect our workplaces to come to our home driveways and put salt down so we don't slip in our driveways, right? So there is definitely still expectation to protect remote workers from a health and safety perspective, but that limited scope when it comes to our private residents and the offices that we have in our private residence very much exists. Okay. So I see that if working at a coffee shop, again, like if you're doing work at a coffee shop, a ministry inspector could definitely come into that coffee shop and do an inspection of the coffee shop, for sure. It certainly to inspect any kind of conditions that those workers would be working in. But the ministry inspector likely isn't going to be focused on those individuals working on their computers in the coffee shops in those senses. I don't know if that helped or not, just seeing if any additional questions came through. Okay, looks like no more questions there. So we maybe move on into the next definition that changed. So the next definition that changed is actually the definition of workplace harassment. So definition of workplace harassment, again, subsection 1, bracket 1 of the Act is amended by adding. So we made an addition to the definition. That's the key there, okay? So now including virtually through the use of information and communications technology after the word workplace. So there was an addition here. So after the word workplace, under that workplace harassment definition, we have added including virtually through the use of information and communications technology. So what does that mean to you guys? What do you think that means, that addition to this definition? What is this trying to protect workers from? Yeah, that's a great answer, Susan. So online harassment or any kind of harassment that's happening on that virtual platform, right? Exactly. So conference calls, Zoom calls, Teams calls, emails, text, social media. Thank you for bringing that up, Rose. I don't always think that we remember that one too. But if you had a company ABC Facebook group and you had all kinds of employees on your ABC company Facebook group and there was harassment going on there, they would be protected from that happening. LinkedIn, right? A lot of people use LinkedIn as a platform. Harassment happening on LinkedIn, that's going to be another area where there's going to be protection. So it's those virtual platforms, right? Those Teams calls, those conference calls, those texts, those emails, those other virtual platforms. Yeah, internal communication for sure. If you have an intranet, maybe, or we have like a social piece on our internet, right? If there was any kind of harassment happening on those platforms as well, then this is going to be those protections in that sense. Okay. So much like the definition of workplace harassment changed, the same change happened to the definition of workplace sexual harassment. So again, that subsection 1, clause 1 of the Act amended by adding those same words, virtually through the use of information and communications technology after the word workplace in the definition of that workplace sexual harassment as well. So 2 different places where the definition of harassment changed. Reminder, the definition of violence did not change. This was only a change to the definition of harassment and the definition of sexual harassment. Okay. All right. So the next definition that changed under Working for Workers Act 5 was actually an addition. So we added a definition of a washroom facility. Obviously, that happened because we made some other changes to legislation that are very much impacted by this definition of washroom facility. So the definition of washroom facility was added to the definitions section of the Act. So washroom facility now includes a washroom, toilet facility, cleanup facility, urinal, shower, or other similar facility, but does not include an eye wash station or an emergency shower. So again, that definition of washroom facility was added. So really any place that a worker could be expected to, use a washroom facility for cleanup purposes, but not an emergency eye wash station, not an emergency shower. Okay. Are we all okay with that? Comfortable with those changes to definitions there? This means washroom access for other workers means workplace showers then. That's a really great question, Bobby Lynn. I don't think so. I mean, I know that this is now what we consider a washroom facility. I think that if you were to allow those other workers to a washroom that only had like a toilet facility and not a shower in it, that would be more than appropriate. I do not believe the legislation is trying to say that we now have to let our transport workers use our showering facilities. It truly is just like those toileting facilities in that sense. So if there's a way to get them to a space where there is no shower available, that would be still considered more than appropriate for sure. Yeah, so would this apply to the requirement to keep documents of cleaning records? Yeah, we are going to talk about that. That does come up in number in Working for Workers Act 6. That's a great question. It is because of that requirement that this definition was added. Absolutely. So we added the definition of washroom facility because of the regulation that is also come into play when it comes to that washroom facility cleaning. Exactly. Okay, so let's continue on with our Working for Workers Act 5 changes because there is still more of them for us to discuss. So the next thing that happened to Working for Workers Act 5 was actually around electronic postings. So basically, when it came to number 5, Working for Workers Act 5, we are now allowed to post all of our health and safety postings in an electronic format. So again, the way it's written for the purposes of the Act and the regulations, information is posted in a readily accessible electronic format if the following requirements are met. So it gave allowability to ensure that electronic format is available so we can post our safety documents in a readily accessible electronic format as long as the employer provides workers with direction on where and how to access the information, and the information is posted in an electronic format that is readily accessible by workers in the workplace. So again, I've gone to lots of workplaces that they've gone to this electronic posting, and that's amazing. It's very much an allowable thing to do now, but they forgot to train their workers on how to access the electronic postings. So great that we can now do electronic posting. Very, very helpful for our remote workers and those of us that maybe travel and things like that. But don't forget that if you did move on or did choose to go to electronic posting based on this regulation, we have to make sure that we're following those other expectations. So legislation again outlined those 2 requirements. Employers provide workers with direction on where and how to access information, and it's able to be accessed at the workplace. So you don't have to go home to use your computer. That computer is available to you at the workplace. You can access that information while you are at the workplace. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to catch up on some of these questions as they come through. How are people getting around confidentiality issues with Joint Health Safety Committee members' names and departments? So I'm not totally sure, Shelley, if I understand the question. I'll try. So we've always had to post their committee members' names in departments before, even like on paper postings. So you would still need to do that electronically. I don't know quite which confidentiality concern we're thinking about here. Like you still don't need to post like their phone numbers or like personal numbers or anything. It really just is the name and the department that they work at your facility. Like you still wouldn't post like home addresses or any of that kind of information. It might just still say like Kristen Honorado, like HR, or Kristen Honorado safety, right? So I don't think that we have a lot of confidentiality concerns there, but if there's more, I'm not saying, let me know for sure. Does this mean you can put all your safety board postings on your internet? Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. As long as you're providing training and access to your associates. That's both true, Lydia. So you can have your safety boards electronically on your intranet as long as you train your workers on how they access that electronic posting or that safety board, and as long as they have the ability to get to it at work, if that makes sense. So like they don't again have to go to their home personal computer. They have computers available to them. They have the ability to access those online virtual documents while they're at their workplace, and they've been trained on how to do so. Okay. Can we have a brief survey question? Maybe I would, if maybe someone in the background can put up a poll, that'd be amazing. I don't know if we can do that, or if not, we can certainly pull that information for you later, Allison, on how people are doing that. That's a great question. I know that for us, again, it's on our intranet. We have a virtual bulletin board on our internet that we can all click on and see all of our things. But yeah, if anybody wants to support Allison's question there, I would love to hear some answers for that one as well. And Lydia, that's what it means. We don't have to have printed copies on the boards anymore. You can have them posted virtually. It does not say virtually and in paper. So you are not required to have the paper copies. You can have your postings virtually as long as, again, you meet that criteria 1 and criteria 2. Okay. All right. So I just got in quotes there, sort of how it actually reads in legislation. So that or in a readily accessible electronic format was added to all areas of the act that outlined posting requirements. Okay. Um, yeah, I love that, Bobby Lynn. There's no harm in having them posted in paper copies as well. I totally agree. It's a great idea to have them in printed copy too, but you don't need to. So that or is not an and. So if you're using both, that's great. But if you only did the virtual, that is equally acceptable. Again, it says or, it doesn't say and, so it really is a one or the other. But if you have both, that's not a bad idea by any means. But you certainly can just go to that virtual setting if that makes sense to your workplace for sure. Okay. Okay, so the next one that's really interesting, that well, I maybe not interesting for all, but I think was certainly interesting, is actually around joint health and safety committees. So I've actually had some questions about this one too. So Working for Workers Act 5 actually has now made it allowable for joint health and safety committees to have virtual meetings. So you no longer have to have in-person joint health and safety committee meetings. They can be done virtually. This actually happened by a removal. So within the legislation, within the act, under committee meetings, they removed some words to make virtual meetings acceptable. So subsection 3, clause 33 of the act is amended by striking out at the workplace. So now if you read subsection 9, clause 33 of the act, where it talks about joint health and safety committee meetings, at one point it said meetings had to be held at the workplace. It no longer says the words at the workplace, meaning that you can have a joint health and safety committee meeting virtually if that makes sense to your workplace. So if you have people that are, salespeople on different shifts, whatever that looks like, and having a virtual meeting makes more sense, that is now allowable and doable within the legislation. Okay, so probably something that we all maybe went through or did during COVID, but now legislation has sort of allowed it to be a legally acceptable thing to do as well. Okay. Any other questions about this before I move on? No. Okay. Has anybody moved to virtual joint health and safety committee meetings? Hands up if your company is doing virtual meetings. Yeah, like a lot of us, right? I think we're at a lot. So again, this is a really great change to legislation, making that an allowable thing based on the new way in which that we're working, right? So really, again, good to see that happened in legislation. All right. So the next things that happened with Working for Workers Act 5 were around washroom facilities. So washroom facilities added to construction requirements too, by the way. So there was an addition to Section 23 for construction requirements, but also Section 25 under the employer requirements. So under Section 25.3, now a new employer requirement. An employer shall ensure that a washroom facility, if any, that are provided by the employer for the use of workers are maintained in a clean and sanitary condition. Okay. Sorry, Spencer, I'll just pause. Yes, the Green Book is also now allowed to be posted electronically. You do not have to have a hard copy of the Green Book. It can be posted electronically too. Yep. Okay, sorry. So 25.3, employer shall ensure that a washroom facility, if any, that are provided by the employer for the use of workers are maintained in a clean and sanitary condition. So that is in force now. So under Working for Workers Act 5, Bill 190, that is in force now. Okay. Records is what's coming soon. So the employer shall keep, maintain, and make available records of the cleaning of the washroom facilities as prescribed. This is as prescribed in the record keeping regulation, which will come into effect, or sorry, come into force January 2026. So right now, there's expectation that employer keeps washroom facilities maintained in a clean and sanitary condition. Happened because of the Working for Workers Act 5. As of January 2026, the record of cleaning as outlined in the regulation will also become a requirement. So you will need to keep records of the washroom cleanings. You will need to keep them as per requirements outlined in the regulation as of January 2026. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to catch up on some of these questions that have popped through. I don't want to miss any. Does this regulation apply to workplaces where the employer does not own the workplace? Yes, it does. So you are still required to do this. You still have a requirement to ensure that those washrooms are maintained in a clean and sanitary condition. That could be now working with whoever you rent the building from or the owner, whatever that kind of looks like, but there's still absolutely expectation that the employer is keeping those washrooms maintained. Yeah. So what if you rent and do not own the bathrooms? Again, kind of that same answer, right? This is an employer responsibility. So employer has to ensure washroom facilities are provided to the workers in that clean and sanitary condition. So even if I'm an employer and I rent the space, it's still my legal requirement to ensure that they're maintained for my worker. So that might be again by connecting with the landlord. It could be by connecting with the owner of the building. The employer still has that obligation to ensure those washrooms are clean for their workers. Okay. Yep. So absolutely, Spencer, if you're separate showers from your toilets, then you're required to have those documents for both. Again, go back to that change that we just talked about. The washroom facility definition changed, including showers. So you have to have a cleaning record for all of your washroom facilities that are outlined under that definition. Yes. Sorry, Jeanette, this is not a size requirement. So even if you had 5 workers or 3 workers, this is still a requirement outlined in legislation. So this did not give us a number requirement. It doesn't say for companies of greater than. This was just written in as an employer requirement. Julie, all. That's a great question. So Julie's question, sorry if you didn't see that there, is this workplace is not just construction work sites. This is now for all. It started as construction. It got added to Section 23 under construction first, and then it got added to Section 25, which is an employer responsibility, meaning it applies to all workplaces. So no longer just a construction expectation. This is an expectation that lands for all workplaces. So every one of us on the call, if we're an employer or if we have an employer, it is now an employer responsibility to make sure those washrooms are cleaned and maintained. Okay, sorry, just going on to the questions here. How far back do the records have to be kept? So if you look in the regulation, again, you can look up that regulation. I think I added it as a resource. If not, Jess, maybe you can remind me to maybe add that as a resource. You have to have record of your last 2 cleanings. So that's all it says from a record perspective, just a record of the last 2 cleanings of the facility. If you choose to keep records for like a month or whatever, again, that would be under your own record retention program. Regulation only says the last 2 cleanings. Okay. So Lydia, that's also outlined in the regulation as well. So what type of records are required? Does it need to be signed off, posted? It does need to be posted, absolutely. So it needs to be posted in a readily accessible area. So like within the washroom or right outside the door, it has to be posted. It does have to, again, have a record of the last 2 cleanings of the facility, and it has to be signed and dated. So it doesn't have to have a checklist, or the regulation doesn't require a checklist, just signed and dated the last 2 cleanings that have happened of the washroom or the washroom facility, and again, posted in a readily accessible area or virtually. So that virtual option is there too. I do know there are some cleaning services out there that you have like an app or whatever, and you can actually log in and see those last 2 cleanings. Again, as long as it meets those virtual requirements that we just talked about, but they do have to be posted and accessible to the worker. I think, Donna, I answered your question there as well. Yeah, that's fair, Brenda. You may not be in charge of maintenance. That's totally okay. But again, as an employer, you'd have to be responsible to ensure that you connected with the owner of the company, right? To get that maintenance done, that you had proof that there was like email sent to make sure that if a washroom was completely broken down, that it was not available to be used by the worker anymore, and that you allowed them to use a different one or whatnot. So as much as you may not be responsible for that maintenance, I totally understand that, certainly for those rented areas, but the employer is still responsible for ensuring that it's done. So again, those connections with the owner, connections with the landlord, whatever that looks like, is still going to be part of that employer responsibility. How about the cleanliness of washrooms in office? Like an office building is maybe what I'm assuming is meant there. So same expectation, they still have to be maintained in that clean and sanitary condition. Yeah. So that's a great one. Sorry, I'm just continuing to read. So Julie, that's the key, even for washrooms that are accessed by workers and the public. Yeah. So it's the fact that if those public washrooms are also the washrooms your workers are expected to use, then this comes into play, right? So if you have public washrooms and those washrooms are also the washrooms for your worker, then yes, it's still the employer requirement to ensure those washrooms are maintained in those clean and sanitary conditions. If you had an office space where there was like a employee only washroom, and like the employee or the worker was expected to use that washroom, but then they also had a public washroom that if they chose to use they could, then likely the public washroom wouldn't come into play. Like again, if there was an employee only washroom provided. But if workers and the public are expected to use the same washroom, so I'm thinking like a fast food restaurant as an example, maybe there's only one washroom and workers and occupants use it, then this is still an expectation that the employer has to follow. Is there any info on frequency of cleaning? No, you have to clean it as often as it takes to keep it in that clean and sanitary condition. So if you're an office building and clean and sanitary conditions can be maintained by cleaning the washrooms once a day, that's completely appropriate. If you're a manufacturing facility and cleaning washrooms to keep them clean and sanitary takes 5 times a day, then that's what it takes. So the legislation does not outline how often the washroom needs to be cleaned, just often enough to maintain that clean and sanitary condition. Invoices are likely not acceptable, Allison. I don't know what the invoice says on it necessarily, but I would think probably not. I think it's likely going to need to be that record that again has the last two cleanings, the time in the signatures and whatnot. Yes, January 2026. So right now there's no requirement for the postings. You've got some time to make this make sense. But yeah, January 2026 is when that requirement comes into play. Yeah, sure, Crystal, let's just read that. Sorry, going back to electronic postings, we can post all required posters if we educate employees where they are located, just to confirm. Yeah, absolutely true. As long as, again, you meet that, and I'll just do a super quick flip. As long as you feel comfortable meeting that 1 and 2 here, your postings can all be electronic. Absolutely. Okay. So sorry, just to clarify, we have an employee washroom, but also have a washroom for the public that the employees could use. Yeah, so if you have a public washroom and the employees like could use it, but they also but they have an employee washroom available to them, then that's not going to apply to that public washroom. If your employees have to use the public washroom, like there's no other washroom for them to use, then it would apply to that. But if they have an employee washroom like in the office area that's there for them, it would apply to that one. If they choose to use a public washroom, like that's not going to apply to that public washroom. Okay. We have 4 washrooms that get cleaned the same day. Can we have one sign? So no, because it has to be available, like it has to be readily available at each of the facility, like at each of the washrooms, right? So if I go into washroom 1, I have to be able to see that washroom 1's been cleaned. If I go into washroom 4, I have to be able to see that washroom 4 has been cleaned. So within the regulation, it says that posted either electronically or at a readily accessible area to the washroom. So yeah, it would really be at each. WSAB posters still need to be posted as far as I know, Julie, is a hard copy. Just remember that WSAB posters are posted based on the WSIA. So Workplace Safety and Insurance Act, a different piece of legislation. Let me confirm that for you though, Julie. It's a great question. I believe that one still has to be hard copy though. Because again, it's a different piece of legislation that's requiring that posting. But I will confirm that. We will add that to our email, and I'll make sure that that there's a confirmation there. If we can post this electronically, can we just provide a binder of information instead of the board? Like as well as the electronic posting, Lisa, like you can't just go to a binder. It's either going to be that sort of classic board that's viewable in that readily accessible area to everybody, or electronically, or both. If you had electronic postings and then you chose to have a supplemental binder, that would be okay. But you can't just go to a binder, if that makes sense. Like you either have to have the board or the electronic postings, or again, both, but just a binder wouldn't be acceptable. Did I miss a question? If I did, let me know. But I think we caught them all in there. All right. So I had a bit of a primer question here too. I think we've actually probably caught some of these already. Certainly the ones about the prepping for the upcoming washroom regulations. Did anybody want to add anything about how they sort of helped implement the harassment changes? So again, things that I noticed while I've been out in industry and out in different workplaces, a lot of people changed their procedures and their policies. They forgot to do the training part. So that's been the big catch that I've had, and I'm glad to see, Rose, that you just wrote that you did a training program. Amazing. That's really what the highlight of this question was about. Remember that you needed to do the training too, right? So it's not just enough to change your policies and procedures. You had to actually train your workers on the change that happened. Great, lunch and learn. That's amazing. That's a great way to do it. Glad to see that, right? So again, really that highlight that communication part was also key. Okay. On a safety day, perfect. Great way to do it as well. Okay. So working for workers at 6, kind of looking at the time. I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. Um, Working for Workers Act 6 is the last of the acts that has been fully implemented. So some things that happened here were really a lot more around some internal changes to the MLI TSD. And these changes really happened a lot with the chief prevention officer and training expectations. So you may not have seen the Working for Workers Act 6 changes so much like right within your workplace. They could again have more impacts to the workplace via the chief prevention officer and some of the things that they can do. So the big thing around the chief prevention officer is really about approving equivalency when it comes to training. And a lot of this is around that equivalency for training that somebody might have out of province. So if maybe you're bringing in a contractor that's had lockout tagout training as an example in Manitoba, if that lockout tagout training in Manitoba is equivalent to expectations in Ontario, Chief Prevention Officer is actually able to allow equivalency to that training and allow it to basically be equally as equivalent here in Ontario as it was in that different province or in that different country or wherever else it's coming from. So really, again, it's that training programs delivered outside of Ontario can be considered equivalent to the program if it's approved by the Chief Prevention Officer. So again, a lot of this can be very helpful when it comes to suppliers, when it comes to contractors, maybe that we're bringing from outside of Ontario, where we still want to confirm their training is appropriate. That training can be now deemed equivalent by that Chief Prevention Officer. Okay. So again, you'll see other pieces to that equivalency training here. So they can approve training providers approved under section 7.2, again, under that same equivalency. Again, even if that trainer is outside of Ontario, as long as the training that they're providing is meeting the expectations that we have in our Ontario training. Okay. Again, those providers in the training could be coming into Ontario with that equivalency, basically deeming that training appropriate here in Ontario as well. Okay, another one. Actually, when I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, now that you saw that QR code that said that we could collect that data. That was another change that happened to Working for Workers at 6. So collection of information by the Chief Prevention Officer. So Chief Prevention Officer can collect personal information directly or indirectly for purposes related to matters that they can use for those purposes. So develop, monitor, evaluate occupational health and safety strategies, report occupational health and safety, provide advice to the ministry on initiatives, etc. So again, that QR code that we put at the beginning, not actually a NUS decision. It actually happened because of this change to Working for Workers Act 6, where the CPO is able to provide or collect data to help improve health and safety strategies in Ontario. Okay. Sorry, so the out of Ontario training provider would use CPO approved statement in Ontario. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So they would be able to again get that statement from the CPO to basically prove their equivalency to make it equally equivalent as far as training went in Ontario. Exactly. But if the only training available is not CPO approved? Maybe give you a more example if you can, Lisa, just so I make sure I understand your question there. A lot of temporary foreign workers and they struggle to find training in Spanish. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. So I think a lot of it would be around the type of training that you're like what they're trying to do. So just remember that not all training that's required needs to meet like CPO requirements. So like if you're doing like a safety talk as an example, like that wouldn't need like CPO equivalency. Like if you were maybe doing like a a training on ladder safety as an example, like that's not going to require CPO equivalency, or like tractor safety training or something like that. Like the CPO would happen more for like working at heights as an example, or again, like lock it, tagout, or forklift training, something that's a little bit more sanctioned. So if you're looking for like more safety, like awareness training that you're trying to find in different languages, it may not require that CPO expectation. We can talk about that one a little bit more if you'd like to too, Lisa. And we also have somebody that's an expert within sort of our temporary foreign workers space that we can connect with too. So definitely reach out after, and I can try to provide some more information on that piece for sure. Okay. Okay. Want to make sure I get through our Working for Workers Act 6 changes. So the other one that the change for Working for Workers Act 6 actually was around another employer expectation. So if you think about Section 25, we've got our employer responsibilities. We made an addition to one of the employer responsibilities under Section 25. So Section 25, subsection 1, Clause B, where we talk about personal protective equipment, there was an addition. So it now says any personal protective clothing and equipment that is provided, worn, or used is a proper fit and is appropriate in the circumstance, having regard to all relevant factors, including such factors as may be prescribed. So basically, it used to basically say employers had to provide personal protective clothing and equipment, and it kind of just ended there. We have now added this part. Provided, worn, or used is a proper fit and appropriate in the circumstance. So it's kind of taken away that one size fits all, right? We can't have one pair of earplugs that we assume fits for everybody. We can't buy one box of extra small gloves and assume everyone's going to fit in them. We've got to make sure that it's appropriate, that it's proper fit, that it's available at the workplace and available for everybody that needs to use it. So there was an addition again to that Section 25 under the employer responsibilities. Another big one that happened for Working for Workers Act 6 was actually another increase in a different capacity, but to the fine expectations. So as mentioned in Working for Workers Act 3, there was an increase from 1.5 million to 2 million for a corporation. That didn't change. However, we actually, for the first time, put a minimum fine in. So under, again, the fine and conviction section, if a corporation is convicted, it can still be imposed that $2 million fine, that maximum $2 million fine. But now there's an extra piece, and the extra piece is associated with the minimum. So again, the minimum now reads, for a second or subsequent offense that results in the death or serious injury of one or more workers in a 2-year period, a minimum fine will be imposed of $500,000. So if you've had an offense, a subsequent or second offense of the same kind of nature that's resulted in critical injury fatality within 2 years, the minimum you will be fined is now $500,000 as a corporation. It still can't be more than 2 million. That's still the maximum, but there is now a minimum. So 2-year period, second or subsequent events resulting in critical injury or fatality, you will not walk away, or a corporation will not walk away with less than $500,000 fine. So again, we've always talked about the world of maximums before when it comes to fines under the Act. Under Working for Workers Act 6, the first time ever we have a minimum. And that minimum is that $500,000 for that 2-year second or more offense. Is everybody aware of this change that happened, or is there any questions about this one? Has the fine for the increase for the supervisor or the employee? So supervisor would have been part of that individual one that did change under Working for Workers Act 2. So that $100,000 to $500,000, that could be a supervisor one for sure, based on the individual again, right? So individual could be a supervisor, could be again, an individual. That would be the increase that happened for them. Okay. They're a reference where you can provide the details what PPE must be provided by the employer. For example, steel-toed shoes, hard hats when architects attend a project site. Um, I might have a reference, Diane. I can take a peek and see if you've got any kind of reference guides. Basically though, like I'm trying to kind of like incorporate. So if you're having like an architect to go onto a project site, you would need to make sure that that equipment was available to them for sure. Um, I'm not sure it means that we have to have like a pair of steel-toed shoe, like boots in every single size, but you might have to have like toe caps that at least fit everybody in that kind of sense. But yeah, we can maybe talk a little bit more about that in detail too. I want to make sure I totally understand that question as well, for sure. Okay, wondering if there's something they purchase or we have to purchase it for them and reimburse. Yeah, that one's always really, really tricky, right? So there is no expectation for companies like that are required to purchase their safety shoes for a company. Again, like that's always like a little bit of a tricky one. Lots of companies certainly do reimburse it and whatnot. They certainly get some kind of allowances. Again, safety shoes has always been a little bit of the trickier one. There is no like legal requirement to purchase safety shoes. And often that's because there are other things, right? Like toe caps that also meet those expectations and whatnot. As long as you have like those available, like in lieu of the safety shoe, like you still have to have some ability to provide. But again, there could be a little bit more nuance in there that we can certainly talk about for sure. Absolutely. All right. So we'll kind of finish off. I'm looking at the time. We want to make sure there's enough time for the last kind of questions. Some proposed changes. So Working for Workers Act 6 is the last one that is actually come into force right now. We have some proposed changes for Working for Workers Act 7. They were outlined in May of 2025. We do expect these will be the next ones that we see released. And again, so far, all of the Working for Workers Acts have come into place, so there's no reason to believe that this one won't come into play as well. So the things that we see coming are the changes that we expect to see coming for sure. So requirement for automatic external defibrillators is on the table on construction projects with 20 or more workers that are expected to last 3 months or longer. So that's a proposed change. So it will basically be only focused on construction projects right now. Again, large construction projects, those 20 workers, 3 months or longer, will like be expected to have an AED or a defibrillator on site. There's lots of proposed changes coming to other pieces of legislation to support things around skilled trades and making sure that skilled trades are easier to handle and making sure that skilled trades are easier to basically come by and make sure that they're upskilled and whatnot. There's expectations on equivalency. So as some of you maybe in the construction world know, a lot of expectations around companies having core certification. Core is now going to be considered equivalent to other management systems like the ISO system and whatnot. So equivalency to some of those expectations is on the table. There's going to be some support for tariff-related hardships that companies may feel. So that's going to be a big one for sure. Skilled trades, again, I just mentioned that one as well. Is there talk about implementing AD requirements for employees beyond construction? Not yet, Allison. We're only seeing it right now in construction. That doesn't mean it won't be other places, but right now the talk is only on those construction sites. Again, we saw construction or washrooms, sorry, starting constructions and then move into industry also or into all workplaces. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It doesn't mean that we're not going to see it next, but on the table right now is only the construction projects. But that's actually kind of leads to this kind of great last question. What are some other proposed changes that you guys would love to see in these Working for Workers Acts? So we don't see any end in sight to these Working for Workers Acts. Again, 7's on the table now. Nothing has been indicated that this is the last one. We expect to continue to see these to continue to make changes to safety. What are some other wish list items that you guys might have? And maybe we will see them come up in some of the future Working for Workers Acts as well. anything that you guys would love to see. I personally would love to see AEDs as a requirement to all workplaces. I think that would be a great one, but anything that you guys have on your wish list, I'd just be interested to hear. Pause as maybe people are chatting or typing, and we'll kind of do our last final slides here as well. So again, thank you guys all so much for attending the session. This again is being recorded and will be available at some other time. I know there was lots and lots of questions. I hope I got to most of them. If I didn't, again, my contact information will be available to you. Feel free to reach out. And we can certainly provide, or I can certainly try to provide as much as I can around any extra detail that you might need or might want to talk about for sure. Again, I know that was a lot of information to throw it at you, but we are always there to support and help any additional questions that come up for sure. Regarding PPE, how do we accommodate bum caps? So that's a big question, Rose, as well. Bum caps in general are actually not legislatively required. Hard hats are, and yeah, there's a lot of things about bona fide safety in the workplace. We can definitely have that conversation offline if you choose. Lots of other things that we can talk about when it comes to that for sure. Lydia, I do not believe we email out the presentations. Again, I think they are just the recordings of the presentations, but maybe Jessica in the background can support me on that answer. But yeah, I do believe it's just the recording. I also know the session is re-happening again in January. So if you have anybody else at your workplace that may want to attend the session, again, we are redoing the session in January as well. All right, so thank you all. Again, it's right at 12. I don't want to keep anybody past their lunch. I will be around for certainly a couple more minutes if anybody's got some extra questions. But again, I really appreciate you all. Thanks so much.